Thanks for being here. We've spent a lot of time over the last few years really thinking about personalized learning. As you all know, that's sort of our bread and butter here at Education Elements, and we're excited to be able to launch this refresh and to engage in these different conversations with all of you. We want to start by checking in. If you've worked with us in the past, you know that check-ins are very important to us. So feel free to add into the chat. But when is a time that you felt like something was made just for you? Really, it felt personalized or tailored to meet your needs. We'll give everybody a moment to think about their answers. Hey, Lori from Rochester. I'm from closer to Syracuse. Wedding. Oh, that's an interesting response, Kristen. Christina, how about you? When is the time you felt like something was tailor made for you?
Yeah, I used to work at a children's bookstore, and when I first got started, I felt like all of the book recommendations that the team put together for me based on what I was interested in just felt totally personalized for me, and I got so many great reads out of it. Definitely miss it. What about you, Courtney?
I'm glad you brought up like a former job because that's kind of where my head was going too. I spent my summers working at an ice cream stand in upstate New York, and there's always things that are on the menu, but because I've worked there, I got to mix and match all sorts of things and make like my perfect ice cream sundae, which is maybe a little disgusting actually for you since I know you like plain vanilla. But it's got hot fudge and peanut butter and Reese's and all of the stuff that people wouldn't let me order if I maybe didn't work there. Um,
Courtney, I feel like if we ever go on an ice cream date, that it'll be very different toppings that we choose. You're absolutely right. I'm a plain vanilla ice cream person, but it sounds like the sundae that you designed was perfect for what you were looking for. Um, and today, we really want to make sure that we're really thinking about those experiences where we feel like something is designed just for you. The you that we might be talking about is students today, but we want to make sure that we're continuing to build that understanding of how do we make sure that teachers, leaders, students, and the larger community really feel like the learning experience is designed just for them. So we want to get started with quick introductions, but before we do that, just a quick housekeeping thing. Feel free to put any questions, ideas, noticings in the chat. We'll be making sure to check that throughout our webinar today and are really grateful to be able to participate with you all through there since we can't see your faces. My name is Cristina Strunk, and I'm a senior design principal at Education Elements. I am based out of the Falls Church, Virginia area, and it's really nice to see some local districts represented here today. I also support districts in New Hampshire, New York, and Ohio. So, really grateful to spend some time today talking about student-centered design. My background is really in curriculum design, making sure that the resources and materials that students are using have opportunities for hyperlocal stories, that they feel seen and represented in the materials, the stories that they are a part of. So I think that's really why this is an area I'm very passionate about. Courtney, what about you?
yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Courtney Flanders. I'm based out of the Dallas, Texas area now, but originally from upstate New York, closer to Syracuse. So, Lori, it's nice to connect. Before coming to Education Elements, I was a high school English teacher, and then I founded a personalized learning high school funded by the Gates Foundation in Dallas, in the Dallas Independent School District. And student-centered design was such an integral part of the work that we did to get that campus started and is really near and dear to my heart. Here at Education Elements, I spend a lot of time working with districts in Texas, in Georgia, a little bit in New York and Florida. And like Christina, I'm a senior design principal. We know that you all chose to join this conversation because student-centered design is probably important to you. And we would love to hear in the chat a little bit about why. Why does that matter to you? Christina mentioned her connection to it through curriculum, thinking about how all students feel seen in the materials that we put in front of them and in the ways that they engage in our classrooms. And for me, it's really thinking about on a systems level, how do we create schools and school environments that have students at the forefront. We'll talk about both of those things today, as well as those aspects of student-centered design that are important to you. And as always, you'll be getting this link to the slides and the recording after this session. If you have follow-up questions or want to connect further, don't hesitate to reach out. We love getting emails from you.
So today is the first in a four-part series as part of our Personalized Learning Reimagined experience. Today we're going to be talking about student-centered design, but we invite you to also listen in on any of the other conversations about some of the principles that are really supporting personalized learning. So you might want to join the conversation around nurturing learning environments, around being equity-focused or data-informed. We'll touch on each of these a little bit today, but our focus really is on that student-centered design principle. But again, if that is something that you're interested in any of these other topics, feel free to register. The link is on the slide, and we'll go ahead and add that into the chat as well.
We want to start with a bit of a shared language around what are these principles that inform systems level change and why are they important? A lot of our work recently in thinking about reimagining personalized learning has been to really make the implicit explicit and call out those things that we know to be true based on our work with schools and districts across the country over the last 7 years or so. And part of that is really thinking about what are the principles that help make personalized learning come to life for schools and districts. We think these four elements are so important to creating systems level change. And today, as Cristina mentioned, we're really focusing in on this idea that a student-centered approach to learning calls on educators to be responsive to the needs of their students, ensuring that they get the instruction they need when they need it. Without this mindset, without this principle at the forefront, it's very hard to do personalized learning well. And so that's what we're digging into deeper today.
What we want to make sure that we're doing throughout each of these conversations, and we'll really focus on this today, is making sure that this is a space where we can share a variety of perspectives. We'll share some ideas that we have, the way that we think about these principles at Education Elements, but then we want to make sure that we're also opening this up to you all to promote conversations not only within the chat, but this opportunity as a starting point for larger conversations. And we also want to make sure that we are creating alignment with personalized learning. So we know that personalized learning is something that's deeply important to many of you. It's really important to us here at Education Elements. And as we're thinking about, again, those principles for systems level change that Courtney was talking about earlier, that we have an opportunity to talk about how do they connect with making personalized learning really come to life.
As many of you know, oh, yep.
I was just going to call out, I see in the chat that Janice added that this really supports students' interaction for increased learning. So thinking about why student-centered design is important, I think that's a really excellent point. Thanks, Janice.
As many of you know, we have refreshed our core for personalized learning and really rethought what our approach to doing this work looks like based on our work supporting schools and districts over the last, I mentioned 7 years or so, as well as new learnings that we had as a result of the pandemic. And that really sparked for us the opportunity to think deeply about how we approach personalized learning and what those key elements are. And so we'll spend a little bit of time talking about how that approach has shifted over the last few years. We've changed our graphic to put student ownership at the center because we know that student ownership of learning is truly the goal. That's what separates personalized learning from some other approaches. We want an environment where students feel like they're deeply involved and invested in the learning environment. In order to get there, we have to create a nurturing learning environment and an environment where students feel seen and supported and cared for. And we've updated our 4 components of classroom practices to better address the things that we've seen in schools and in districts.
So as Courtney was sharing, we really wanted to make sure that it was clear that the sole focus, that goal, is student ownership. that as a result of personalizing learning, that students have a clear understanding of what they're working on and why, that not only do they know that, but they're able to articulate it. So if you go into classrooms and ask students, what are you working on? Why are you learning this? They're really able to share how that moment fits into the larger trajectory of their learning experience. We also see this in students being able to set goals and reflect on them, and that they're really able to make choices about what they're learning and why they're learning it. But we know that the content and the way that we approach learning is not the only way that students are going to be able to participate in personalizing learning. We want to make sure that the overall learning environment is one where they're able to practice and promote self-awareness, social awareness, and strong relationships. That if we don't get these key components right, that nothing else is going to fall into place. Especially given the last 18 months, we know that strong relationships are incredibly important to students being able to access content. So today we're really going to think about what are those experiences that we can design so that students have the opportunity to build strong relationships and practice these key areas.
Yeah. And as we mentioned, part of this work has also been to refresh the Core 4. We won't focus too much on this today, but just so you know what our new Core 4 includes, we've got reflection and goal setting, making sure that we really build that self-awareness and that goal setting is truly meaningful for students. In prior iterations, we've separated targeted instruction and data-driven decisions. We know that those two things go hand in hand, and that at its most actualized, students can articulate what instruction they are receiving and why. That really puts students back at the center of personalizing learning, and is why the refresh targeted instruction is so important to us. In thinking about flexible path and pace, this is developed over time to move beyond the content and the tools and the digital tools that we're using, and to really think about how the design of the learning experience helps make sure that students get what they need when they need it, whether that's flexibility in the path, the pace, the performance task, lots of options for students. And finally, we've added in this element of collaboration and creativity. If we've learned anything over the last year and a half, it's that that opportunity to really connect and engage deeply with other humans is so important to our experiences as educators, as learners, and as human beings. And so really calling out that the true personalized learning environment allows students to discuss their ideas, make meaning and problem solve together, and to have those moments of sparked creativity.
So before we share a few ideas of how we think about student-centered design, we wanted to just have a moment to hear from you all. So we'd love to see in the chat, what does student-centered design mean to you? Why is this a priority? So we'll give everyone a couple minutes to add their ideas in the chat. I know a few of you have added them before, so feel free to add a new idea or something that's resonating with you. Why is student-centered design important?
Seeing a lot of those big E words in the chat: engagement, empowerment, making learning engaging, thinking about how every child is unique. Christina, what does this pillar or principle, excuse me, mean to you, and why is it so important?
I think this idea that Ryan actually just mentioned of reflective of life outside of school, I think that in the best case scenario, classrooms are really able to prepare students to enter the real world. And if we can bring those connections into the classroom, if we can think about what is most meaningful for the students that are in our classroom in that particular moment, the more exciting that learning environment is. So making sure that we get to know those students so that we can actually design around their needs, and then thinking about what they might need in the future, I think is really important. Courtney, what about you?
Yeah. I think about all of the different decisions that go into education and into schools and how we decide which instructional materials to put in front of students, how to teach our class, and even just the environment and the schedule that students operate within. And how sometimes those things really just aren't driven by what's best for kids. They're driven by either the way we've always done it or constraints that we feel like we have to operate within, whether that's how many minutes a student has to get from one class period to the next, or how we ask them to move through their day. And when we shift to thinking about student-centered design, there's an opportunity to bring in so much more joy and relevance to the learning environment, that I feel like we all want, but sometimes can get lost in how we build things. So I love this idea, and it really reminds us at Education Elements of thinking about the design thinking cycle, and how we often try and build our work off of this. If this is a new image to you, we'll just chat through it quickly. But the idea that human-centered design is a creative approach to problem solving that really starts with empathizing with who it is that we're designing for, and thinking about how we can best meet their needs, and feeling safe enough to try out things and prototype and take some calculated risks in order to better meet the needs of our users. If you've read the Creative Confidence book from the folks at IDEO, then you have heard this experience before. But really, what what always sticks with me is this example of thinking about the MRI machine and how it feels for folks to go through that. And so, if you've ever been in one of these machines, feel free to add to the chat what that experience was like for you. Christine, have you ever had to go through one of these?
Yeah, I have, and it was as a young person, and I will say that my experience was definitely the beginning stages where it was pretty scary versus where the story ends up.
Um, Definitely a really great piece of medical technology, but as Tarika is putting in the chat, it's scary. It leads you to feel claustrophobic. It's loud, and it's really at a moment where you're already feeling so vulnerable and nervous that because something is going on with your body, and you're at the doctors to figure that out. The people who created this technology really had the best intentions in their mind, right? They want to create something that's going to better meet the medical needs of their community and the world at large. But the reality is, this is not designed to be a comfortable, fun, exciting experience for anyone. And when we see it in action, specifically in pediatric wards, what we find is that children, our youngest children, are so afraid of this machine that nurses were actually having to sedate them to put them through. What a terrible experience for a child who's just trying to get that medical attention that they deserve. And so when we think about how this can be redesigned to better meet the needs of users, there are some barriers and constraints that we still have to work within. You can't move when you're in this machine. It's going to be dark and claustrophobic and loud and maybe a little bit scary. But how can we redesign that to better meet the need of making it scary in a more exciting and joyful way? And so, working around those constraints across the country, you can find these redesigned experiences where there's a rationale to why it is the way that it is. So, it's not just tight and dark and scary because it's this terrifying piece of technology. It's those ways because you're in a spaceship and you're blasting off into outer space. And for these ones that look more like a pirate ship, the nurses and doctors really get into theme and they say, "Our matey, welcome aboard. Today we're going on an underwater adventure." And they frame it in that way. And you can see, even in this image, it almost looks a little bit fun for children, and can take a really terrible experience and make it better. When we think about designing with our users in mind, we're able to make informed and smart decisions that better meet their needs. Um, Christina, sorry you didn't get to go through it like this. What do you think that experience would have been like for you if you had?
Yeah, I think that it would have made it a lot easier to go through this process. I think I would have also, especially with the next piece, if I were able to be a part of the design of this as a young person and share my feedback, I think that I would have felt a lot more empowered and engaged in the process overall. Some of the same sentiments that you all shared in the chat about why student-centered design is important in the classroom. So I think just about that participant experience, how do you make someone feel like they are a part of something, and really designing around their needs?
I love that. So let's translate this, as Christina mentioned, to an educational setting. I told you all I was a former high school principal. At the start of each year, we'd ask our incoming freshmen to think about how they wanted to redesign their learning experience, and we'd give them some time to go through and redesign the desk. Thinking about what kind of student desk would better meet their needs. So you can see from this prototype that this group of students created, they wanted something with more space. They wanted a space that was tech enabled so that they could access all of the tools and resources in front of them. They've chosen a lot of bright colors. I definitely feel like they're asking for maybe more joy than the typical desk, although they've modified a traditional desk to make it that way. Miguel is sitting on some kind of cushion, and I think that's suggesting the idea that students want to feel comfortable in their learning environment. While the desk is not the whole learning experience, and definitely furniture does not create your educational reality, it does signal what's important to students in their learning environments. Having opportunities to collaborate, to create, to feel welcomed, comfortable, and like they have all of the tools that they need to be successful in today's world. And we were able to use their prototypes to help redesign what was previously a media center space to better meet their needs. You can't see these specific students in this picture, but what you can see is other students engaging in this. They helped us pick out the colors, the furniture, and what this looked like. And while this is a pretty maybe radical example for where some of us are in the education space, so you don't always get the funding to redesign your media center. At its heart, we know that we can all be designers and we can all think about how to go through the design cycle to make an experience better meet the needs of our students. We've got a couple ways that we see that happen here, whether it's reviewing student data or interviewing students or talking with our colleagues about students. There are lots of opportunities for us to empathize with users. We can define what their needs are, work with students to better pinpoint their challenges and their successes at school. And then we can think about how do we design solutions. And many of us as educators know we are constantly prototyping, trying out a new lesson plan, proposing a new advisory structure, thinking about different things to try to test them out with our class, and then to really step back and reflect on what worked and what didn't, thinking about what changes we want to make to upcoming lessons or to the ways that we operate as educators. Um, and so this really guides kind of how we think about this work and leads us into another opportunity for you all to really add to the chat. What resonates with you about design thinking, and what are some of the ways that you currently use student-centered design? Yeah, Christina, can you say a little bit more about ways that you've seen people use student-centered design?
Yeah, so there might be some representatives from this district on this call right now. But whenever we start working with a new set of schools, when we're thinking about personalized learning, we always begin with an understanding that we need to get to know the people who are actually a part of this community before we start designing for them. And so we conduct focus groups with students, with teachers. We've often sent out surveys and then share that data back with the school teams to think about as you go on this journey of thinking about what elements of personalized learning are most important to focus on and bring into your school. How is this connected to what students say are the strengths? Where are some of those opportunity areas? And it's really powerful to see those trends from those focus groups themselves, since it isn't someone from the outside coming in and saying, this is what you should do, but really listening from within. It also, I'm thinking about another project in New York where there's some pilot curriculum that's happening. And because this is the first year that they're trying out these new materials, there are specific moments to pause, gather feedback from students through surveys that are read out loud to them and that they can record video answers as well, so that we're really soliciting that student feedback and understanding what are the things that we need to adjust moving forward. Seeing a lot of cool ideas in the chat too.
Yeah, Lisa's calling out how we can think about those flexible seating, how we create playlists and choice boards. Janice is really building on that, incorporating those various learning strategies to teach concepts, and thinking about how we help students to unpack the curriculum doc so that they can really think about how to design it and what that course needs to look like with teacher support. In many ways, we think about how we use student-centered design to make personalized learning really relevant and responsive to students' needs, whether that's in designing all of those things, but or in thinking about what it is that we design with students and having them be co-creators of that learning environment. There are a couple of mindsets that we like as you're really thinking about student-centered design. And really, it all encourages people to take risks and to try things out, to learn from failure, to just try and make something, and to have confidence that their creative abilities will continue to grow and stretch just like any other muscle. To come from a place of empathy and not make assumptions about the student experience, but instead to go straight to the source and hear from our students about what that experience looks like. To be willing to embrace ambiguity, to have some optimism, and always, always to iterate on what we're doing, because we learn so much from testing things out and trying them. I think for me, a great experience in empathy was really just participating in the Shadow a Student challenge, where you spend some time acting as though you are a student, following them through their day and thinking about what a long instructional day sometimes our students have, and how challenging it was for me to just go from class to class and keep my energy up as an adult with a full cup of coffee every morning. And so that's always one of those that sticks out to me. Christina, how about you? What kind of design mindsets are important to you in this work?
As I think about some of those instructional materials and the way to make those more student designed, I think about iterate, iterate, iterate. Not only because we're always learning more information, but because the young people who are in our classrooms change every year. And so if we're thinking about how to make sure that the materials really reflect their stories and their experiences, we need to make sure that there is that flexibility to incorporate new experiences, new stories that are relevant and designed with those students in mind. And so if we're thinking about the new people in our classroom, that means that there are adjustments that we'll need to make, and constantly gathering new data and understanding how we can iterate to make it best fit the students that are in our classroom.
So in all of this, sometimes, really easier said than done. We've spent some time thinking about why this matters and what it looks like for you. And we would love for you to add what challenges are coming up. In a perfect world, we'd be able to see you and hear you and talk through these things. But instead, if you've got a challenge that comes up, or some advice that you're looking for, we'd love for you to add it into the chat so we can discuss it as a group and kind of crowdsource using the chat to hear what's top of mind for you.
There are a couple of things that have already come up, so feel free to add in more details. I'm wondering, Lisa, especially about that flexible seating. I know that's something that has been really interesting for folks. What are some things that you all either kept in mind or experienced as you added in flexible seating, or some of those experiences like station rotation or students moving throughout the classroom?
I think right now folks are thinking about what does that look like in a post-COVID, still COVID environment, and how do we do that safely? And so, one conversation I actually just left before this call was, what does it mean to be in a group? Do I have to sit right next to my group members to be in a group, or can I leverage some tools and technology to collaborate with a group in a way that is still socially distant? This looks different for different age learners, but whether that means leveraging something like a shared Google Doc or using a learning management system like Canvas, Schoology, etc., to have students still be able to have that group experience and that flexibility in what they're doing, um, without having to think about how to move their desks all the time, was an important thing for the district I was just chatting with.
Yeah, I also think there was another conversation about flexible seating specifically, that the classroom had just invested in previous years to get all of these interesting, exciting new seating arrangements. And so it used to be much more choice, where students could just every lesson decide where they're going to sit when they got to a particular point in time. But what this teacher was able to do is actually solicit the advice and feedback of the students in her classroom to say, how can we make sure that we each get an opportunity to use flexible seating given these constraints of students needing to stay in a particular seat maybe for a week at a time, and then going through that sanitation process. And so the students came up with some procedures and ideas for them to be able to still use those flexible seats, but keep all of the social distancing guidelines in place, which was a pretty cool real world application.
Yeah, I love that. I think allowing students to help work through the challenge really invests them in that process and helps them understand why things are the way they are. And I'm sure that they came up with much better ideas than what we would have come up with. I'm seeing a kind of a trend both from Anne and from Ryan around, people have done school the same way for lots of years and they're feeling comfortable with it. And why would we ask students to co-create that learning environment when maybe it worked for us, right? Or we have this sense of like, that's just how the world is. We all need to just go through this factory model of education. um, I think we hear that quite a bit. And what often helps people is just thinking about, why is school designed the way that it's designed? And why have we done it this way in the past? And offering those opportunities to reflect on how has our world changed since the time that we all were students and in the environment where our students now live. So much of what we do is more tailored and personalized to meet individual needs, but also the jobs that students will have when they leave our doors, they're not the same jobs that existed when we started creating schools and thinking about what a public education looks like. And so, are we truly meeting students to be able? Are we providing an environment where students are able to meet the challenges of today or the challenges of tomorrow in how we design school? I know when we were working with parents to educate them on what personalized learning means and what it looks like for their child, we started by bringing in a panel of community professionals to talk about what skills do people have when they come into their jobs and what skills are they missing? What is it that they need? And so much of what those employers said is, we need people who can think critically, who can advocate for themselves, who can work in a team. No one said, I wish students had done a better job memorizing these facts or sitting through lectures. And that was a pretty powerful experience for school board members, for parents to be able to hear about why we had to think about things differently.
Yeah, and I think about what you were saying and what Anne has raised in the chat as well, and think about how we can make the folks who might be more hesitant about changing or shaking things up and use some of that empathy work to really get them on board too. So, whether that's bringing in people from the community, whether that's doing some focus groups with leaders to understand what are their hesitations, what are they worried about, and how can we maybe try something small scale. Maybe there's a pilot group that we're really excited about. Maybe there's a moment in time that we can try some of these things out that feel a little bit safer. But thinking about how we can at least dip our toe into student-centered design if that feels right.
Yeah, and you bring up a mantra here at Education Element is what's safe enough to try. And so, can we start by thinking about a student-centered experience in perhaps an elective class that it does not have high stakes testing, where people feel a little more freedom, or in a summer school program, which potentially hasn't worked very well or been very effective in the past, and is less risky for us to redesign, or same kind of thing with an after school program. But is there an area where folks feel like it's safe to take some risks and try things out and learn from that so that we can apply the best practices to the larger scale and iterate on whatever needs to be refined? And I love your idea too of letting the naysayers, if you will, experience a more personalized, learner centered environment to get a sense of which they prefer and why that is.
I think one of the biggest questions whenever we're starting a journey around personalized learning is, what does this look like? How do I actually do this? And oftentimes, when teachers or teams see what this can look like in a classroom, that's when all of a sudden eyes are opened and we leave with a feeling of all of the possibility. And so, if we can help people have those experiences, I think that is where a lot of the magic happens.
Yeah. You mentioned this feeling of possibility, and we want to end on a high note in this conversation together. We know that there's so much good work being done in schools to better meet the needs of students, and would love to hear from you all. What are some of those things that are really giving you hope when you think about education and the future of education? Lisa, I love what you're sharing of just creating a choice board of brain breaks, and thinking about how we can use those moments to build relationships, strengthen relationships, and really give folks those moments of connection throughout the school year.
Something that's giving me hope is what Anne was sharing about uh, walking the talk. If we're actually modeling those practices to make sure that the learning experiences for teachers or leaders in our building, that we're asking them to think about student-centered design, actually have a chance to feel like something is designed for them as well, and how empowering that can be and translate into the classroom too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what gives me hope is just seeing all of the folks who choose to show up to these conversations, knowing that you all have very busy days, but people are constantly, taking the time either to be here in person or to watch the recording and thinking about how they can shift or adjust their current practices or continue to iterate to better meet student needs. And in all of that, really, it's that passion that educators have for the work and their willingness to always continue learning and growing that makes me know our kids are in good hands. And this is so refreshing to hear in the chat just how many of you feel like you're collaborating with teacher leaders who love this approach, that students are saying how much they love it. I think all of those things are so important.
Yeah. And the more that we can connect people, if maybe someone doesn't know what it looks like yet, and there's someone in your district or your building who is doing this well, who, like Anne said, is living in this approach, uh, that can be really powerful too, to build collaboration, those professional networks, and really get people to see how are some other ways of creating classroom culture.
Absolutely. As we go through this time together, we encourage you to continue joining for these conversations and thinking about small ways that we can bring these practices to life. We'd also would love if you would use some of the time that you had blocked for this conversation to give us your feedback. Christina's dropped a link in the chat, but would love to hear really what's resonating with you and what additional supports or resources you feel like you and your district are looking for. And as always, we are available, excuse me, to connect whenever you would like. I'm putting our personal work emails here in the chat as well, but we are always looking forward to hearing what are you looking for, what resources would be helpful on this journey, and how can we best support all of you and the great work that you're doing.
Thanks so much for joining, everyone. And if there's any feedback around what we could do more of or less of in the upcoming conversations, we're excited to redesign, to iterate, and to take your feedback for those next sessions. So thank you, everyone. It was really lovely spending some time with you this morning.
Yeah, thanks for being here.